Hello my friends and welcome, my name is Dennis and this is the latest update from Ukraine. So we have some recent news from the Kursk Oblast right from the front lines. It seems like Ukraine started its own counteroffensive on the Russian counteroffensive, which happened recently, and today Ukraine took the part of the settlement Novoivanovka. So again yesterday and it is today. We have in general the clarification of the front lines in Kursk. So again yesterday, today, and we can see that our dragon is not happy any longer. So it's actually the good news for Ukraine. I do expect that Ukraine may send even more reinforcements, and the big idea for Ukrainian military command, from what I see, is to close this trap for the Russian army, to trap the Russian forces in Lubinovka and in all of this area. Whether this tactics is successful for the Ukrainian army, only time may show, and I'm sure that the next week we're gonna see the outcome of this entire operation in the Kursk region, because everything decisive is happening right now over here. And we also have the video of the Russian convoy being absolutely kaputted in that particular place of the Ukrainian counterattack in the Kursk region. Yes guys, I also published this stuff on my Telegram. So Russians broke through the Ukrainian defense lines, but they were not capable to reinforce their group, and after all Ukraine gathered forces to counterattack and it was successful. Russia wants to cut the Ukrainian forces located not far away from Kornevo, this entire northern part, but so far they are not successful. And today Ukrainian military officials plus Zelensky said that Russians definitely struggle with this operation and Ukraine is not hesitating to send their reinforcements. So it means that the Kursk direction is very important for Ukraine, at least from the logic of the Ukrainian military command and the Ukrainian government. But my personal thoughts are a little different. Ukraine should have enormous resources to try to go, for example, to Kurchatov nuclear power plant. I tell you about it in every of my videos. So this operation shouldn't be the second Crimean, where Ukraine had tremendous losses. It should have a logic to go further and further, and if Ukraine has just limited resources compared to what Russia has deployed in the region, and Russia has deployed around 50,000 soldiers in the Kursk region, that means that for the further tactical success Ukraine needs around 100,000 soldiers in the Kursk region, so the stakes are really high. At the very beginning of the operation, just a few thousand of the troops was enough to repel the Russian forces. Their defense just collapsed under the pressure of Ukrainian army. But now guys, it's a total different picture, so that's why I think that Ukraine, if something goes wrong with this Kursk operation, may open the other front where the Russian security is not that robust. Well, we also have not so good news, that definitely we have the confirmation from the deep state military map that Russians moved towards the Borky, so they cut the tail of the dragon. It was yesterday, today, but actually this operation, this offensive of the Russian side happened around 1 or even 2 weeks ago, but just now we have this update from the deep state military map source. If you check any other military map, you'll see that the Russian forces moved to Borky a long time ago actually. So to conclude this topic about the Kursk operation, now it's 50-50 in favor of Russia or in favor of Ukraine. We're gonna see again in the coming days the development of the situation, and I'm really eagerly waiting for it. I know that Ukraine used one of the best forces in the Kursk region. Plus, as I understand, Ukraine sent the best of the best tanks, also Leopard 2, Challenger 2, Abrams tanks. All of the stuff is now in Kursk. Yes, partially also in the eastern regions of Ukraine fighting against the Russian attacks, but here Ukraine concentrated really capable forces. But again, Ukraine should receive the constant support from our allies. I see the reduction in the scale of the Ukrainian support. Zelensky recently said that Ukraine is capable to get 14 of the new brigades. It's around 150,000 soldiers, but they may equip just 4 of the brigades with enough weaponry. So the weaponry is still not enough in Ukraine, and we know that there is a delay coming from the military support agreed by our allies in the United States and in other countries. Well, with Europe it's more or less on time, but United States it's kind of late for the delivery of the weaponry. You might find many of the sources like mainstream media saying about that stuff, but nevertheless, the weaponry is coming and it's a good thing for Ukraine. So I'm sure that this year Ukraine will be able to hold, in many of the directions, but the Pokrovsk direction is under a big question. Guys, we're gonna review the Eastern Front lines a little later. Let me tell you about the awesome news which happened today. It appears that Ukraine for the first time was able to shut down the Russian jet with the help of the F-16. Well, we have the report about it from the Institute for the Study of War. And initially the information came from the Russian military blogger who has the connections in the Russian military. He says that Ukrainian F-16 downed a Russian Su-34 fighter bomber aircraft in an unspecified area of the war theater on October 12th. Institute for the Study of War cannot verify the claim that Ukrainian F-16 was involved in reported loss of the Russian Su-34, but we have many of the rumors coming from the Russian side. And you know, Russians would never say like that. If it wasn't close to truth for them, F-16s are just useless, their fighter jets are the best of the best, the Ukrainian F-16s will not solve anything. But if they say that F-16s shut down their airplane, well, probably it is true. But again, I also cannot state it 100%, but we are very close to that version. Su-34 is the crazy Russian airplane. Why crazy? Because no other army produces those aircraft types like fighters, bombers. It's something unique for the Russian aviation. They're a little clumsy because they're overweight, and the base was taken from Su-27. You can see this flanker style and this tube on the back. Well, unfortunately, even before the strict sanctions were applied on Russia, Russia was capable to produce many of those airplanes, more than 100 units. They lost many of them during this war and continue to lose, as you see, and they're also capable to carry kind of the heavy load of the gliding aviation bombs which Russia uses against the Ukrainian positions. So Ukraine probably started to try F-16s to fight against this threat. That is the idea, was the idea for Ukraine to obtain F-16s. And you know, recently Netherlands, I guess, announced that they supplied new F-16s to Ukraine, old, new, but Ukraine now has many more of those airplanes in its air force. That is why Ukraine is capable to use them, probably even on the front lines. I already spoke about this tactics which American Air Force use for their F-16s. If they have the advanced enemy as Russia with Su-35s, well, they need to put lots of the F-16s to counteract to that threat. The same is applied for Ukraine. I'm sure that there are military advisors from the United States in the Ukrainian Air Force and the Ukrainian Military Command, and they tell how to use those airplanes in the most effective way. Yes, sadly, Ukraine has already lost one F-16. My idea that probably it was shut down by Ukrainian air defense because those cases happened in the past before, but with the Soviet airplanes like Su-27, MiG-29. I don't think that that fighter jet got some issues, technical issues. Also, the pilot was really experienced, so I guess it was the friendly fire, but I cannot prove my version. And unfortunately, investigation is not going out with initial report about the air crash, but we'll see it in the future, I'm sure about it, but from the media services from the West. After all, it's the Western-made airplane, and our allies will get the information about the real cause. Well, -1 for the Russian side, by the way, also together with the pilots, and Russia invests lots of the funds to train their pilots, and also they need time for the training, around 3 years at least, and before the Air Force Academy, so sometimes even 5-6 years. Also, they should have the military experience, so that loss is actually hard to replace. Here's something new from the Russian channels: let the Earth to be your sky, brothers. Usually they wish the internal flight, Earth to be sky, it's something new. But you know, after all, in reality, the Russian pilots will be just eaten by the worms in the ground. Together with their airplane, by the way, and yes, Russia already has confirmed that they lost this airplane. The reason is mainly unknown. You probably know that I do not really like the Russian pilots. Actually, I hate them because they target Ukrainian civilian infrastructure together with military, and there are lots of the life losses among Ukrainian civilians. But especially I don't like Su-34 pilots and the bomber pilots, because they are the ones who drop the bombs. So the destiny of 2 of those pilots, yes, on board of this aircraft type, there are 2 of the pilots, is well deserved. So if it is true, and I think that it is, that Ukraine shut down that airplane using F-16, the delivery of those fighter jets to Ukraine was a crucial one, and also it means probably that Ukraine has obtained a longer range air-to-air missiles able to hit the Russian jets. And also means that the radar of the F-16 is enough to spot the enemy enemy aircraft. I mean the range of the radar, because after all Su-34 doesn't have that sophisticated and really powerful radar as Su-35. Well, I think that now Russia will launch their Su-35 to patrol the territory near Ukrainian border more often. My friends, as you know, I try to film the videos almost every day, but what keeps me motivated to do so? Well, your kind support on Patreon, your subscriptions, your everything. So if you want to support the job that I do here on YouTube, you may join my Patreon. The Patreon page, the link for it, I'll put in the video description just below. Thank you so much for your kind support. You probably know that Russia struggles with their armament, that's why they raise the salary to the space for their soldiers, but also they're looking for the possible alternatives, like for example North Korean forces are backing Russian side, Ukraine's officials say, and we have the information also from the Western intelligence and from Korean intelligence that North Korea sent already their forces to Russia for the ground training. Potentially North Korea has already delivered tens of thousands of their troops to Russian side, and Russia seeks for two of the solutions. First is to send them directly to Ukraine to fight against the Ukrainian forces. That means the global escalation of the war, really. And the second variant for Russia is to replace their soldiers in Russia or in the border control with the North Korean soldiers. So North Korea will protect the Russian border. Well, it is really something new. I wonder if we have some of the historical perspective of this case in the past. Well, if that case finds its confirmation in the future battles, obviously Ukraine should obtain more military support, or probably some of our allies would think to send volunteers or mercenaries to Ukraine in more organized manner. I think it could be the French International Legion, and President Macron already said about it more than a year ago. Guys, tell me, what do you think? Whether North Korean soldiers could be successful in the actual battles, because they actually did not have the military experience. Their pre-ancestors had those in the war between North Korea and the South Korea, but it was a long time ago. The current North Korean army is a total different thing. Well, what they have is the propaganda and the brainwashed people, but they also have the resistance, like internal resistance, because there were many of the cases how the North Korean soldiers escaped the North Korea to South Korea or elsewhere, so probably they will try to find a way out from Russia if they're sent by the country somewhere and the control is seized temporarily. Here I can show you just a screenshot. There was a huge kaboom in Grozny today. Yes, on a gas station, but the reason of this fire is yet unknown. It happened just a couple of days after Ramzan Kadyrov announced his threats towards one of the Russian senators who is affiliated with the Russian regime in Kremlin, and also Kadyrov is not okay with some high-ranked persons in Dagestan and in Ingushetia, so there is the conflict, and maybe we're gonna see more of that stuff happening in Grozny, in Chechnya. Also, by the way, it could happen with Kadyrov himself. About the video itself, it is crazy, my friends. Here's actually a huge tank full of propane, so after the kaboom, it started to roll like a stone in Indiana Jones movie, and it hit cars, it hit also people, unfortunately civilians. Well, Hollywood couldn't film better. Again, if you want to watch many of those videos from this accident, please join my Telegram. I shared those kind of the videos there. Unfortunately, YouTube is kind of strict with this content, that's why the screenshots is more or less okay, but if I show you the video itself, well, there are some of the risks for this video to be restricted. And yes, this car was on the way of this tank, and the other one, and the other one. But you know, guys, for the Russian Federation, the threat from Kadyrov doesn't really matter. Peskov already commented that it's the internal case of the Wildberries, of the authorities of Chechnya, of the authorities of the Dagestan and other Russian officials. Kremlin is not in this business. But what Kremlin cares about is the quad-robber movement among the Russian youth. They say that this style of behavior was developed in the CIA to ruin the Russian society. It was done to dehumanize the Russian nation. Yeah, the war that Putin started in Ukraine is not a dehumanization, but quad robbers is something really terrible. The head of the Russian Duma, the Russian parliament, stated that bullshit. I know why there is so much hate against quadrobbers, especially in ex-Soviet republics. People just do not understand that stuff, and the youngsters, they're just searching for some kind of the training stuff, they like it. It's nothing illegal, like they're just playing, pretending to be some animals on the fresh air. It's better than to stay in the gadgets all day long. So what's the alternative from Russia for their children? Pioneer camps, concentration camps. Like, how far could it go? In North Korea, for example, there is a special standard for the haircut of their women. And Russia is absolutely galloping to this lifestyle of North Korea. Russians, you live in North Korea. Yes, now you can leave your country. Now you can still have your business in Moscow, in St. Petersburg. You are more or less okay as before. But come on, we know the reality that it will be a closed state like North Korea or the Soviet Union in its worst time with the Iron Curtain around. Russians always say that Putin represents their family values, that he is fighting against LGBT stuff because Satan brings it to the society. But Putin is actually a divorced man who has a lover, Alina Kabaeva, and unregistered children. About this guy, who is also believed to represent the family values, well, you know his family story. Children from at least 3 of the women, many of the divorces, sex scandals. Yes, it's all about traditional family values. About the discord ban on the territory of the Russian Federation and also in the Russian army. Today, the Russian general, one of the main Russian generals, came out and said that the Russian army has never ever used Discord as the communication tool. But here you see the actual video, and those videos are tons in internet, and Russian Z bloggers also confirmed that Discord was the main tool to obtain the data from those kind of the drones, from the surveillance on the battlefield. They say that it is the absolute bad thing that Discord was banned by the Roskomnadzor, and they also accuse Roskomnadzor to work for the spies on the West. Well, Russians immediately start to use a new service, it's called Gadlet, and it was made by Roblox for the game players. And you know what happened yesterday? The service blocked the Russian accounts, yes. So what's the tool Russia has? Actually, there is no alternative. The Russian military bloggers complain about that as well, that Roskomnadzor blocked the only possible version for the communication on the front line using a real live drone video. So Russia is now very dependent actually on the Western technologies, Western sources, but they try to separate even if it caused them severe losses. Well, what can I say? Good job, Russia. Good job. Ukraine has the tool and you don't. Oh, what we have here is the Feodosia or storage occupied Crimea. Russia lost at least 9 of the fuel tanks or the oil tanks on the territory of the port. Yeah, still some of the tanks are out there, but the infrastructure is significantly damaged, so now the port is not able to function without the fuel for the ships, and Russia also bases their military ships in Feodosia port. Well, still those are the targets for the Ukrainian drones. A mishap happened with the Russian Antonov 3. Well, actually, it's the Ukrainian Antonov 3 because, first of all, it was made in Ukraine. It's kind of the rare aircraft Antonov 3 because it has the turboprop engine instead of the piston engine. Here's just a picture for you to get familiar with the history of the Ukrainian aviation. So the frame is the same, just the engine changed. This engine is more powerful and it uses the jet fuel to operate. Why is it a rare aircraft? Because just 25 of those were built. It has 2 of the versions, a seaplane and a normal landing gear one. I just checked the serial number and I found out that it was the firefighting aircraft. Russia used it also for the transportation of people, cargo, and for direct purpose of fighting the fire somewhere in Siberia. So actually the aircraft is produced in Ukraine, in the Ukrainian Soviet Republic in the 1960s. And probably Russians couldn't access the spare parts for the aircraft because of the sanctions, but they continued to fly it. But if it was the engine failure, for me it's kind of strange because the engine itself is produced on the territory of the Russian Federation, so they should have maintained it properly. But investigators say that it was the engine failure, kind of strange. One of the passengers on board lost his or her life. Yes guys, I am the aviation nerd and I always like to speak about the aviation stuff, especially Ukrainian airplanes, Antonov 2, I really like this airplane, Antonov 3 as well. Everything about the aviation is cool, except sometimes it is used for the war crimes as we see in the Russian Federation. Alright, now let's go to the front lines. We have some of the good news from Selydove. It appeared that Ukraine also started a counterattack, sent some of the reinforcements, and Russia now struggles to get into the settlement, to this town actually, because the territory and the number of buildings, as you can see, it's kind of big one, so the battle for it will be heavy. But after all, you know, Russia has an initiative, and I have no doubts that they'll get this place under control, but the question is when and with what kind of the losses. But something tells me that the losses for Russian army will be just tremendous. The MK mapping stated that definitely Ukraine performed a counterattack, pushing Russian forces out, and also from this very interesting altitude. I guess it's the high ground out there, so Russian forces were forced to leave the area, but just before they moved in and unable to secure the ground. It seems like the Russian army, even with that enormous resource, still struggles with their operations against the Ukrainian army if there are defense lines. The city itself, I mean the town is kind of small, is a defense line because there are lots of the buildings where Ukrainian soldiers could hide against the Russian artillery fire or something else. So across the fields Russia is kind of fast, but if they enter settlement, nope. Why is it happening for the Russian army? Well, I guess because of the incompetent commanders, or maybe they're in lack of discord. And also Russians were pushed out from the Pokrovsk direction, so it was yesterday and it is today. They had to retreat their forces because they were not capable to hold, for example, this tree line. But you know guys, if we take for example the Toretsk city, Russia pushed there around 4 days ago. I didn't tell you about it because I missed those news, but still Ukraine has the majority control over the settlement. I know that some of the YouTube bloggers, pro-Russian I would say, bloggers like History Legends or something else, say that Ukraine is withdrawing the forces from Toretsk, but it's absolute lies. Ukraine still keeps control over the large part of the settlement, and Russia, yes, goes there, but very, very slowly, again with severe losses. So for Ukraine, for defense, everything is more or less okay in the Toretsk. Ukraine is still there, but the Pokrovsk direction, I would be more concerned about that. The Mirnograd town, Pokrovsk itself, Selydove Halts, Kurakhove is also one more concern, but Russians are still kind of far away from the settlement. One more point where Russia gets the ground is in the Kupiansk direction. Well, basically they cut Ukrainian army into 2 parts. Here they almost reached the Osko River. So it was yesterday, today, and they're approaching those local dacha and this road which Ukraine also used for the supplies. Russia sometimes also cuts the bridges. This happened in Kurakhove direction. I wonder why, because the bridges are needed for the Russian army for the further offensive actions. It means that Russia is more concentrated on cutting Ukrainian supplies than advancing in the future perspective forward. And they bomb the bridges not just in Kurakhove, it also happens in the Kharkiv Oblast, it happens in Pokrovsk direction. Kind of strange as for me. Maybe they understand that their goal is just limited, that they are able to occupy just a few more of the towns this year, and that's it. With those strikes, it means that they want to secure the front line, not advancing forward, for example, the next year. Or maybe they're gonna use some of the engineering equipment, as in this case this river is not that wide. You know, I subscribe for some of the Russian groups to check out the enemy side as well, and they always collect the funds. For example, here they bought the Starlink antenna for the soldiers somewhere in Ukraine. This is kind of the simplified version of antenna. It doesn't have the stand and the motor which moves the antenna relative to the satellites. I had that older version. Maybe now I would have bought this one because, yes, as I told you, it's more portable. Why Starlink is unable to switch those antennas off, for me it's just a mystery. Maybe they cannot identify whether it's a Ukrainian Starlink or the Russian one. Around half a year ago there was the information from the Starlink company that they're working on this process of how to shut down the Russian antennas, but we see that still they're free to go. So the Russian Roskomnadzor actually does more to block the Russian, for example, Discord service or any other service compared to Elon Musk and his Starlink company. I understand the risks, but there should be a solution to block this antenna for Russians. Not just this one, Russians have hundreds of those. An interesting remark from Andriy Yermak, the chief of the Ukrainian president's office. I don't really like this guy and his management of the Ukrainian politics. Basically, he's a great cardinal of the Ukrainian government, and he said that Russia will be informed about Ukrainians' victory plan. And he also said that potentially Russia could participate in next peace conference around Ukraine, which was actually cancelled for November. Maybe it will take place in December somewhere. Well, as for me, informing Russia about the victory plan of Ukraine sounds itself kind of strange. It's like in 1941, United Kingdom would call the Nazi Germany and inform them about the victory plan of the United Kingdom. Sounds kind of cringy. Well, maybe it's just a trolling, who knows. But Yermak was damn serious speaking about this stuff. Or I guess, as you saw today, it wasn't that dramatic for Ukraine. We had also some of the positive news. I hope we'll have them more in the coming days. And anyways, I'm gonna keep you updated on the situation in Ukraine. For now, please don't forget to press your huge like to this video. By doing so, you help me a lot. And as usual, I wish you all a peaceful sky wherever you are, and have a great time.